This week we've got a treat for Energica and Zero fans, a direct comparison between the Eva Ribelle and SRS. The best thing of all about this episode, it's not based on some review of just a few hours of riding, but rather one owner's long-term experience with both the Eva Ribelle and the SRS. Austin Ammarell owns eMoto Powersports in Robbinsville, North Carolina, which rents out the Eva and SRS featured in this video. He's racked up plenty of saddle time on both bikes. I got to ride both bikes on a glorious fall day recently up in North Carolina, and I'll share my impressions, but more importantly, we're going to start with Austin.
And you're one of the few people out there that actually has experience riding both an Energica and a Zero back-to-back. Go ahead and compare that Eva Ribelle to this SRS. How do you think they compare?
So the Eva Ribelle is kind of, if I have somebody who doesn't know anything about either one, I describe the Eva Ribelle as a more aggressive, in-your-face kind of, I don't want to say a more thrilling experience because that's subjective, but it is louder, it makes more noise, it looks a little flashier with the red frame and everything, and it is a bit quicker and has a bit more of a power band at higher speed relative to the Zero, but as a daily only bike that you sometimes take on a joyride for a weekend or go on a weekend trip, the Zero is just it's very peaceful, low maintenance. I would say both are very low maintenance, but the Zero is belt drive versus chain drive on the Energica. There's no fluid for the motor. There's no transmission gear oil. So there's no fluid change aside from brake fluid. So the only maintenance you have to do is belt, tires, and brakes. And that just makes for a really hands-off ownership experience. So I say to ride one short-term, I would like to experience an Energica, and that would give me a very thrilling electric motorcycle experience that I probably wouldn't be able to get over for maybe a few weeks after doing it. And if I were to own an electric bike long-term, I would probably tend to do the Zero if it fit my use case with the range and everything, because I like low maintenance things. I don't want to have to change fluid or mess with a chain or anything like that. I like the belt drive low maintenance aspect personally, but short term to short term, the Zero is a little bit more calm than the Energica, I would say. The Energica, you can tell it was designed on a track. It has very, I don't want to put the Zero behind the Energica because I see them as pretty equal for different reasons. But the Energica was just designed with a lot more aggressive riding in mind, and the Zero is really good at kind of a little bit more casual riding, and it can do aggressive kind of sporty riding in and out of the twisties, leaning over far and blasting out of the curves, and it just has a little bit less top end than the Energica does, just because the motor is slightly less powerful. But I would say in short that the Energica is just a very aggressive sporty ride, and the Zero is a bit less aggressive, more calm and serene experience.
Well, as somebody that owns a SRF, I can already notice some differences between the F and the S. This S is a little smoother than my F. It's a little bit more laid back, and I know part of that is just the riding position, but probably also because it's got the newer battery, the weight's probably a little bit different than mine. But this is very much a boulevard bike, but still wonderful in the corners.
Yes, I I agree. I do personally prefer the SRS that you're riding now a lot more than the F that's back at the shop, simply due to the ergonomics, because I am a bit taller than the average rider at 6'8", and I feel that leaning into the curves on the SRS is a lot more natural feeling than the SRF, simply due to the riding position and the ergonomics of the handlebars, and just personally the force I have to apply to get the bike to do what I want it to do feels a lot more natural on the bike you were on, the SRS, rather than the F back at the shop. On the Energica, I've done multiple 100, 120, 130 mile loops, and I've had anywhere from 10 to 25% remaining. That would estimate my total range to be anywhere from 140 to 160 miles. And on the Zero SRS that you're on, it might be marginally less than that. I would say 130 to 150 miles with the same riding, same route, same rider, obeying the speed limit and everything.
I guess on an interstate, you would expect that difference to be more pronounced.
Yeah, the difference, I don't think the difference would be much wider. But I would say the Energica, with me riding on the interstate at 65 miles an hour, would be just over 100 miles, maybe 110 miles, and I would bet the Zero gets about 100 miles.
Okay.
In the configuration we've been talking about right now.
Well, that outside of a power tank, you do have the largest battery, right? This one's fully unlocked.
Yes, yes. Aside from the power tank, that bike has the biggest battery capacity before installing a power tank. So it's 17.3 kilowatt hours, and you can charge it up to 110% to go from that 15.6 to 17.3. That's where the 17.3 comes in, is you have to enable a setting to charge up to 110% before you charge it up if you want the extra range. Otherwise, it's just a basic 15.6 kilowatt hour battery pack. Whereas the Energica Rebelle has a 21.5 kilowatt hour pack all the time, no matter what. That's what you're getting every time you charge up. The Energicas, they sound a lot louder, either on camera or when you're standing beside it on the side of the road as it passes you by.
Yeah.
But when you're on the bike, it's a very smooth, it's still very quiet when you're cruising. You barely hear the motor over the wind going 50, 55 miles an hour. But when you crank on the throttle in sport mode, you're just immersed in the sound, the feel, the rush of the power pulling you back in your seat, everything. So that's what I was talking about earlier. It's more of an aggressive experience than the Zero. Just mainly based on it's got a little bit more power, and it is I say a little bit because on paper it is a little bit, but something in the way the power map is set up or something, it just pulls significantly harder than the comparable Zero does. It's not a marginal difference. It's not so much that I would put the Zero in second place purely based on power, but speaking on power, it is a noticeable difference.
Now, what about the suspension and the turns? So, for an aggressive, really skilled rider, when you're taking the twisties, do you feel more confident than one versus the other?
I would say if you don't take the time to set up the suspension for you, and you just hop on a bike that's set up from the factory, I would say they are about the same. But if you set up this suspension and tune it properly, this one has, you can adjust the dampening of the rear shock with the twist of a little knob with your fingers, and on the SRS, I believe you need a tool to do that. So it's a little easier to kind of like tweak it on the Energica. But I would say overall the Energica edges it out a little bit, simply because of the adjustability. So if you feel your rear shock is a little bit bouncy and soft, you can stiffen it up just by twisting a little knob. and it does make a good bit of difference in the corners if you're being more aggressive. But I would say they're pretty close in stock form with the base model Energica suspension versus the Zero suspension. But the Energica offers an Öhlins upgrade that I don't personally have experience with, but those who do and ride aggressively on a track or on twisty roads like this say that it makes a world of difference, and there's nothing else like it. So
Yeah, I've read the same thing.
but I haven't, I ride fairly sporty sometimes, but I'm not a racer by any means. And I would say the Energica might barely edge it out over the Zero. But it's not by too much. I wouldn't buy or take one or the other on a rental trip based on the suspension alone. I wouldn't be able to put too big of a difference between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I would say really, from a practical standpoint, the luggage options probably make a bigger difference, because if you wanted to, say, take one of the bikes out for 2 or 3 days and really go at it touring, this SRS would just be the way to go, with the 2 hard side cases in the top box and the tank storage on top of all that.
Yes, that's my experience too, is that the Zero is much more of a practical bike, just in terms of being able to take all your things with you, and the Energica is more based on performance, and the Zero is more of an even combination of performance and practicality.
Now, full disclosure, I am a Zero owner. I own a 2020 Zero SRF. I'll try to be objective, but as you know, motorcycles are a highly personal experience. From a riding perspective, I preferred the SRS, but I'm not an aggressive rider, so I didn't come anywhere close to pushing either bike to its limits. The Eva Ribelle's extra weight is immediately apparent. It's more tricky to maneuver in low-speed situations such as parking lots or in the extra tight, slow-speed turns that are common at the tail of the Dragon in Deals Gap, North Carolina. The Energica is also more top-heavy, making it feel less forgiving of imperfect lean angles at slower speeds. Because we were in the mountain twisties, I can't comment on long-distance highway touring, but what I can say is the SRS was a more relaxing ride. Based on my limited time with the 2 motorcycles, I got the impression over the long haul, as the miles piled up, the SRS would be much more comfortable for my particular size and riding position. But we all know when it comes to riding position, arm length, torso, all those things play into whether you are going to find a comfortable riding position in a motorcycle. I can see how taller riders might prefer the Eva Ribelle because it does sit higher than the Zero. The short story is, in my opinion, if you're doing a lot of long-distance interstate travel, the Energica is the better choice because of its bigger battery and DC fast charging. But when it comes to comfort, luggage space, and commuting day-to-day in an urban or regional environment, I'd pick the SRS. Chances are, if you've made it this far into the video, you already know the specs for both of these bikes, but if you don't, you'll find links in the description field of this YouTube video and in the post on the web at evrider.tv. You'll also find a feature on eMoto Powersports linked at the end of this video. And if you're ever in the Deals Gap, North Carolina area, I definitely encourage you to look those guys up. They do a great job, and I was thrilled to have the opportunity to ride a Zero and an Energica for the day. And if you've enjoyed this episode of EV Rider, please give it a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel so I can continue to bring you more adventures in EV motorcycling. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.